Malcolm X. Denzel Washington's portrayal of Malcolm X in Spike Lee's 1992 biographical epic remains one of the most complete and electrifying performances in modern film. What makes this portrayal extraordinary is not just the accuracy of Washington's transformation, but the totality of it. Every gesture, inflection, and silence is deliberate. He approached Malcolm not as a martyr or symbol, but as a human being undergoing radical evolution. Washington spent nearly a full year in preparation, immersing himself in the autobiography of Malcolm X, listening to hours of recorded speeches, and even adopting the same dietary restrictions that Malcolm followed during his time in the Nation of Islam. This obsessive attention to authenticity allowed Washington to embody not just the man's rhetoric but his inner rhythm. The cadence of his voice, the timing of his words, and the conviction behind them were reconstructed with precision.
Every time you break the seal on that liquor bottle, that's a government seal you're breaking.
The film charts Malcolm's journey from petty criminal Detroit Red to disciplined revolutionary, and Washington ensures each phase feels distinct yet connected by the same restless intelligence. Early scenes in Boston and Harlem capture the charisma that made him magnetic even before his transformation. Washington uses humor and swagger to hint at the leadership potential lying dormant beneath the hustler's exterior. When Malcolm finds faith during imprisonment, Washington subtly shifts his tone from impulsive to introspective. He slows his speech, straightens his posture, and replaces bravado with purpose. This physical evolution mirrors the psychological awakening of a man realizing his power lies not in violence but in articulation. Washington's delivery of Malcolm's public speeches is a masterclass in controlled intensity. Every line is calibrated to echo both the preacher's rhythm and the scholar's precision. The mosque scene in which he commands a silent crowd with a single hand gesture encapsulates Washington's ability to portray authority through restraint. Yet he does not shy away from Malcolm's contradictions. When the character begins to doubt Elijah Muhammad, Washington introduces traces of vulnerability behind the defiance. His eyes betray disillusionment even as his words maintain composure, revealing a leader torn between loyalty and truth. A rarely discussed fact is that Washington improvised parts of Malcolm's final rally speech on set after watching footage of the real event the night before shooting. His performance was so powerful that extras in the audience reportedly broke into spontaneous applause, forgetting it was a film. This merging of historical accuracy and spontaneous human energy made his Malcolm X feel less like an impersonation and more like reincarnation. It earned him universal acclaim and redefined the standard for biographical acting. Detective Alonzo Harris. In Training Day, released in 2001, Denzel Washington detonated his own image of moral authority by stepping into the skin of Detective Alonzo Harris, a corrupt narcotics officer who manipulates, intimidates, and destroys with surgical precision. The performance is volcanic yet measured. Washington plays Harris not as a cartoon villain, but as a man who has long confused control with survival. Every smirk, pause, and tone shift reveals a predator who reads people the way a chess master reads the board. What makes this role so unforgettable is the paradox it creates. The audience despises his cruelty yet cannot look away from his charisma. Washington approached the character with a meticulous sense of realism. He spent weeks riding along with Los Angeles narcotics officers, learning their routines, slang, and body language. He understood that true power often manifests quietly, so when Alonzo does erupt, the explosion feels earned. The early scenes with rookie cop Jake Hoyt, played by Ethan Hawke, show this manipulation in real time. Washington's delivery of the line,
"The shit's chess, it ain't checkers,"
encapsulates Alonzo's entire worldview. Life is a game of strategy where morality is a weakness. His calm assurance contrasts violently with the chaos he creates, making his authority feel both seductive and menacing. Throughout the film, Washington uses rhythm as a weapon. He controls conversations like a conductor, alternating between humor and threat to keep others off balance. The diner scene, where Alonzo tells Jake that he runs this neighborhood, is a masterclass in tonal dynamics. He leans in with a smile, his voice dripping charm, only to punctuate his point with sudden aggression. Washington's manipulation of tempo mirrors Alonzo's psychological tactics. Unpredictability is his dominance. One of the most fascinating behind-the-scenes details is that Washington personally rewrote parts of Alonzo's dialogue to match the slang and cadence of the real South Central cops he observed. He also pushed to wear black leather instead of the planned suit, arguing that the slick, predatory look represented Alonzo's self-made image as a street king. These changes helped ground the character's authenticity, bridging realism and theater. Adding to the authenticity, director Antoine Fuqua wanted it filmed on location in South Central, Watts, and Rampart, areas rarely used for major productions at the time. That decision meant the crew had to negotiate directly with local gangs for permission to shoot. Fuqua and producers met with gang leaders, including members of the Bloods, Crips, and Rolling 60s, to gain safe passage and community cooperation. The film's climax, where Alonzo's reign unravels under the gaze of the neighborhood he once ruled, distills Washington's brilliance. His desperate outburst,
"King Kong ain't got shit on me,"
was improvised in a single take. It transformed what could have been defeat into a manic, delusional sermon of lost power. Washington captures not just corruption, but the loneliness beneath it, a man consumed by his own performance of invincibility. His Oscar win for the role confirmed what the screen had already proven. He was operating on a level few actors ever reach. Private Trip. In Glory, released in 1989, Denzel Washington gave a performance that distilled centuries of suppressed rage into one unforgettable figure. Private Silas Tripp, a runaway slave turned Union soldier in the 54th Massachusetts Infantry. While the film focuses on Colonel Robert Gould Shaw's leadership, it is Washington's portrayal of Tripp that provides the emotional core. He embodies the skepticism, bitterness, and defiance of a man who has no reason to trust the system that now demands his loyalty. Washington makes every glance and movement speak for a lifetime of humiliation. Tripp is not a symbol of simple heroism. He is angry, abrasive, and openly insubordinate. In the early scenes, he mocks his fellow black soldiers for believing in a white officer's promises of equality. Washington delivers these lines with razor precision, his tone balancing sarcasm and pain. This cynicism is not mere rebellion, it is survival. The infamous flogging scene captures the depth of his performance. When Tripp is whipped for leaving camp, Washington refuses to cry out. Instead, he locks eyes with his commanding officer, tears streaming silently, transforming physical punishment into spiritual resistance. That look, defiant, wordless, unbroken, became one of the defining images of his career. Washington prepared for the role by studying the diaries of black Civil War soldiers, many of which expressed frustration with their treatment by Union officers. He understood Tripp not as a secondary character but as the voice of every soldier who fought two wars at once, one against the Confederacy and another against racism within their own ranks. This understanding gives his every scene a raw authenticity. Even when Tripp's dialogue is minimal, his presence dominates the screen through body language, tight shoulders, clenched fists, and a constant readiness to fight or flee. A lesser-known detail about the shoot is that Washington insisted on doing the flogging scene in a single take to preserve its realism. He told director Edward Zwick that repetition would dilute the authenticity of the pain and humiliation. The decision paid off. The raw emotion that erupted on camera was entirely real, as Washington later admitted that the lash marks left visible welts on his back. TriStar Pictures originally hesitated to cast Denzel Washington as Tripp, worried that his limited fame from television and cry freedom wouldn't attract audiences. Director Edward Zwick refused to back down, insisting that Washington had more fire in one look than most actors do in a whole speech. Once the first dailies came in, the studio instantly changed its stance. After Washington's Oscar win, TriStar publicly celebrated the choice, but privately acknowledged they had nearly replaced him just weeks before filming began. Tripp's death in the film's climactic battle is one of cinema's purest acts of defiance. Charging into enemy fire while carrying the fallen flag-bearer's colors, Washington communicates redemption without a word. The soldier who once rejected the system dies, fighting for something larger than himself, but on his own terms. The performance earned Washington his first Academy Award for Best Supporting Actor and marked the moment critics and audiences alike began to realize that he was not just a great actor, he was a transformative one. William Whitaker. In Flight, released in 2012, Denzel Washington plays William Whitaker, a seasoned commercial airline pilot whose heroism and self-destruction coexist in brutal tension. From the opening sequence, where Whip performs a near-impossible inverted landing while high on cocaine and alcohol, Washington establishes a character built entirely on contradiction. He moves through the wreckage of his own life with the calm precision of a professional who knows he is exceptional, yet powerless against his addiction. Every gesture and every silence is layered with denial. Washington approached the role with a deep understanding of addiction as a disease of control. He reportedly avoided any performative cliches, no wild drunkenness, no melodrama, and instead chose subtlety. When Whip wakes up in his hotel room, calmly preparing a line of cocaine before putting on his uniform, Washington performs it like a morning ritual, revealing that chaos has become his normal. Later, during the flight, he shifts effortlessly from recklessness to godlike composure. The harrowing crash sequence works because of Washington's absolute stillness amid panic. He exudes the mechanical focus of a man whose professional instincts override moral failure. What makes the performance devastating is its honesty. Washington doesn't ask for sympathy, he invites discomfort. Whip's denial in the hospital scenes, his insistence that
no one could have landed that plane like I did,
rings with narcissistic truth. Washington makes us understand that arrogance is both his armor and his poison. When Whip visits the wrecked plane, standing before its charred remains, the quietness in his face reveals a man finally confronting the scale of his guilt. Washington, a licensed private pilot, spent weeks training with aviation consultants to learn cockpit procedures and proper emergency protocol. He wanted his hand movements and radio calls to be technically precise, grounding the drama in realism. Professional pilots praised the realism of Denzel's cockpit behavior, even calling it the most accurate depiction of a pilot under pressure they've ever seen. However, several airlines, particularly Delta and American, refused to allow the film to be shown on their flights, arguing that it could trigger passenger anxiety. Although Flight centers on addiction and denial, Washington chose to remain completely sober throughout filming, telling director Robert Zemeckis he wanted to feel everything raw. Having faced his own struggles with alcohol earlier in life, he approached the role with unflinching honesty. Crew members said his performance during the detox scenes felt too real, forcing Zemeckis to cut several takes because of their emotional intensity. As the director put it, he didn't need to play drunk. He understood what it was like to fight for control, a truth that resonated through every frame of the film. The film's climactic hearing is one of Washington's most controlled explosions. When confronted with the truth about the flight attendant who died, Whip's denial collapses. His voice cracks as he says,
Because I drank the vodka.
There is no redemption speech, no cinematic flourish, just surrender. It's the quietest confession of his career, and therefore the loudest. The role earned him another Academy Award nomination and reaffirmed his mastery of portraying men who fall not from weakness, but from the unbearable weight of their own perfection. Coach Herman Boone. In Remember the Titans, released in 2000, Denzel Washington embodies Coach Herman Boone, a principled, uncompromising leader tasked with uniting a newly integrated high school football team in 1971 Virginia. Washington's portrayal avoids sentimentality. He does not play Boone as an inspirational caricature, but as a man navigating hostility with intellect and strategy. The role is about power, how to wield it, when to restrain it, and how to turn it into respect. From the first scene, Boone's authority is palpable. When he tells his assistant coach,
"This is where they fought the Battle of Gettysburg."
It is not just history, it is a warning. Washington delivers every line with the precision of a drill instructor and the rhythm of a preacher. He makes Boone's speeches function like plays drawn on a chalkboard, direct, purposeful, and emotionally calculated. His diction is deliberate and sharp enough to cut through racial tension. Yet the genius of the performance lies in how Washington balances that firmness with subtle empathy. Beneath the bark is a man who sees discipline as the only language that prejudice understands. Washington's preparation for the role included extensive conversations with the real Herman Boone, who advised him on how to maintain command without alienation. Washington adjusted his performance accordingly. His Boone is not a tyrant but a tactician. In practice scenes, he stalks the field with mathematical precision, watching his players as if studying an equation. His leadership style is rooted in strategy rather than charisma, but Washington injects just enough warmth to make moments of unity feel earned. One of the film's most iconic sequences, the sunrise speech at Gettysburg Cemetery, captures Washington's ability to combine gravitas with vulnerability. Standing before rows of tombstones, he quietly tells his players that
50,000 men died right here, fighting the same fight that we're still fighting amongst ourselves.
The line is delivered not as a sermon but as a diagnosis. Washington lowers his voice, breaks eye contact, and lets silence finish the sentence. It's a portrait of restraint, the power of a man who knows that true authority doesn't need volume. Behind the scenes, Washington insisted on running actual drills with the young cast to create real exhaustion and unity. Actor Wood Harris later recalled that Washington's intensity during rehearsals blurred the line between Denzel and Boone. The result was a team dynamic that felt lived in rather than performed. The film's emotional resolution, when black and white players carry Boone on their shoulders, would risk cliché in lesser hands. But Washington's expression makes it transcend traditional cinematic formula. He looks proud, but also wary, aware that victory on the field doesn't erase the larger battle. His performance transforms a sports drama into a parable about leadership under fire. Lieutenant Commander Ronald Hunter. In 1995's Crimson Tide, Denzel Washington delivers one of his most cerebral performances as Lieutenant Commander Ronald Hunter, a newly assigned executive officer aboard a nuclear submarine facing off against Gene Hackman's volatile Captain Frank Ramsey. The film unfolds almost entirely within confined metal corridors, relying on psychological tension rather than spectacle. Washington uses this pressure cooker of a setting to craft a portrait of moral intelligence under siege. From his first appearance, Hunter is calm, analytical, and meticulous. Washington shapes him as the embodiment of modern military intellect. Trained in nuclear strategy, fluent in restraint, and grounded in logic rather than instinct. He contrasts sharply with Ramsey's old-school authoritarianism. Their conflict is not merely about orders, it is about philosophy. Ramsey represents obedience and aggression, while Hunter embodies reason and ethics. Washington's performance hinges on this clash, using stillness and precision to counter Hackman's explosive energy. The tension between them becomes a battle of generations, races, and ideologies. Washington prepared for the role by spending time aboard an actual submarine and consulting with naval officers about command hierarchy. He wanted Hunter's behavior to reflect genuine military discipline, so he studied the subtleties of rank-based communication, the way subordinates speak in measured tones, and the minimal physical gestures permitted under command protocol. This attention to realism grounds his portrayal. Even his posture feels regulated by Navy decorum. Yet beneath the calm exterior, Washington infuses Hunter with a quiet defiance. When Ramsey screams, Hunter listens. When Ramsey postures, Hunter calculates. His resistance is not emotional but intellectual. The film's defining sequence occurs during the mutiny standoff, when Hunter refuses to launch nuclear missiles without confirmation of orders. As alarms blare and tension mounts, Washington's voice remains controlled, his diction crisp. The steadiness of his tone becomes an act of rebellion. When he finally says,
Captain, I relieve you of your command of this ship.
he delivers the line without volume or triumph. It lands like a moral verdict. The power of that moment lies in restraint, the courage to remain calm when hysteria reigns. One rarely mentioned detail is that Washington and Hackman had such charged chemistry that director Tony Scott encouraged them to avoid rehearsing together to preserve real tension on set, which resulted in genuine clashes during filming. Several reports and interviews over the years confirm that Washington and Hackman had heated exchanges on set about how scenes should be played. One famous instance occurred during a particularly intense confrontation in the submarine's control room, when Hackman allegedly lost his temper and shouted at Washington mid-take. Washington stood his ground, calmly telling Hackman, "Don't you ever talk to me like that." The entire crew went silent, and after that, their mutual respect deepened. By the film's conclusion, when Hunter's measured decisions avert nuclear catastrophe, Washington redefines heroism as moral clarity rather than dominance. It's one of Washington's most understated triumphs, a performance that radiates control, integrity, and the rare courage to think before acting. Ruben, the Hurricane Carter. In The Hurricane, released in 1999, Denzel Washington delivers a performance that transcends impersonation. He becomes the soul of Ruben Hurricane Carter, the middleweight boxer wrongfully imprisoned for a triple murder he did not commit. The role demanded both physical transformation and emotional excavation, and Washington approached it with the precision of an athlete and the empathy of a historian. Every frame captures a man who refuses to let his body's confinement define his spirit's range. Washington began his preparation by training like a professional fighter, enduring months of rigorous boxing sessions to replicate Carter's compact power and ring rhythm. He mastered the mechanics of Carter's stance, the short hooks, the forward lean, even the subtle shoulder movements that gave him his nickname, Hurricane. But beyond muscle memory, Washington immersed himself in Carter's psyche. He spent long hours with the real Ruben Carter, observing his cadence, his stillness, and his moral clarity. Their conversations, often lasting deep into the night, shaped the performance's authenticity. Washington later described Carter as a man who radiated calm fury, an energy he translated perfectly to screen. In the film's early scenes, Washington portrays Carter as both defiant and self-contained, a man whose entire identity has been reduced to a prison number. The scenes inside the solitary cell, where he refuses to wear the inmate uniform or answer to his assigned name, are particularly revealing. Washington performs these acts of rebellion with quiet dignity, using silence as resistance. The way he sits upright in his cell, penning pages of his autobiography while light cuts across the concrete walls, turns confinement into a cathedral of endurance. The film's most powerful moments occur not in violence but in restraint. During the scene where Ruben Carter learns his final appeal has been denied, Washington's performance was so raw that the entire set fell silent when the take ended. He remained seated and trembling before quietly leaving without a word and not returning for the rest of the day. Director Norman Jewison later remarked, "That wasn't acting, that was something he pulled up from deep inside himself." The powerful moment captured on screen was the first and only take filmed. A little-known production fact is that Washington performed his own boxing sequences with minimal stunt assistance, determined to convey the exhaustion and control of real ring combat. He also requested subtle wardrobe changes, slightly looser prison uniforms to reflect Carter's gradual mental liberation. His attention to these invisible details elevated the realism without ever calling attention to itself. The final courtroom sequence, where the judge overturns Carter's conviction, captures Washington's mastery of understatement. Instead of triumph, his face registers disbelief and relief in equal measure. The line,
"Hate put me in prison. Love's gonna bust me out,"
becomes less a declaration and more a whispered revelation. The performance earned him a Golden Globe and an Academy Award nomination, solidifying his status as an actor capable of transforming righteous anger into cinematic grace. Jake Shuttlesworth. In 1998's He Got Game, Denzel Washington steps into the conflicted psyche of Jake Shuttlesworth, a man imprisoned for accidentally killing his wife, and temporarily released to convince his estranged son, the nation's top basketball recruit, to sign with a specific college. The film, directed by Spike Lee, operates on two levels: a father's search for redemption and a critique of the predatory machinery of American sports. Washington's performance fuses both. He becomes the living embodiment of pride, regret, and reluctant wisdom. Washington builds Jake from silence outward. His first scenes in prison show a man weathered by guilt, shoulders slumped, voice softened by years of regret. Yet when he is given temporary freedom, Washington infuses him with urgency, a man sprinting against time to rewrite his own story. His movements through Coney Island's playgrounds and street courts are both literal and symbolic journeys back through failure. He does not chase forgiveness, he chases understanding. One of Washington's sharpest choices is his refusal to sanitize Jake's character. He is not a nurturing father or a martyr, he is abrasive, manipulative, and impatient. When he tries to reconnect with his son Jesus, played by NBA legend Ray Allen, every conversation teeters between apology and control. Washington uses subtle hesitations to show Jake's internal battle, wanting to help his son yet reverting to dominance. The line, "You owe me," lands not as anger but desperation. the plea of a man who cannot separate love from possession. Washington's preparation went beyond acting. The climactic one-on-one game between Jake and Jesus was entirely unscripted. Spike Lee had planned for Jesus to easily win 10-0, but Washington, who played college basketball, asked to make it real. Cameras rolled without interruption, and to everyone's surprise, Denzel scored the first 2 points legitimately before Allen locked in and won 10-2. "He caught me off guard," Allen later admitted. "I didn't think he'd hit anything." That spontaneity deepened the authenticity of their fraught father-son dynamic. The competition between them became literal. The film also benefits from Washington's deep empathy for men broken by their own pride. When Jake visits the site of his wife's death, Washington plays the scene without words. He kneels, his hand trembling, and his face folds under the memory. The performance captures the exact midpoint between remorse and paralysis. Most of the movie-watching public doesn't know that Washington cut his standard salary in half to work with Spike Lee again after Malcolm X, believing in the story's social weight. His collaboration with Lee produced one of cinema's most complex portrayals of fatherhood. John Quincy Archibald. In John Q., Denzel Washington channels the desperation of the working-class American father into one of his most emotionally raw performances. As John Quincy Archibald, a factory worker whose son collapses from heart failure and is denied treatment because his insurance won't cover the surgery, Washington embodies the quiet terror of a man forced to challenge an entire system to save his child's life. The character is not a hero in the traditional sense. He is an ordinary man stripped of options, and Washington turns that ordinariness into power. From the opening scenes, John Q is portrayed as a man quietly drowning under economic pressure. Washington plays him without theatricality. His gestures are small, his speech restrained, his patience slowly fraying. When he's told that his health insurance no longer qualifies him for coverage, the shift in his body language is almost imperceptible. He blinks twice, straightens his back, and you can see the weight of futility settle in. That subtlety grounds the entire performance. Washington's genius here lies in his ability to show outrage simmering under civility. A working man who still believes that reason can fix everything, right up until it doesn't. When John takes the hospital's emergency room hostage, Washington never slips into villainy. His voice remains measured, even tender, as he demands a heart transplant for his son.
I am not gonna bury my son. My son is gonna bury me.
The line could have been shouted, but Washington delivers it like a prayer, flat, steady, and heart-stopping. That choice transforms a moral dilemma into a universal cry of parenthood. The hostage scenes become less about violence and more about moral conviction. He reads people's faces, calibrating his tone, moving between authority and vulnerability with surgeon-like precision. Washington based the performance on extensive observation of working-class families struggling with medical debt. He studied how financial humiliation changes posture and speech patterns, the habit of apologizing before asking questions, and the way a smile hides frustration. He told director Nick Cassavetes that John Q wasn't a soldier fighting the system, he was a father cornered by it. To reinforce realism, Washington improvised several of the hostage negotiations, including the emotional exchange with a cardiac patient who volunteers to die so John's son can live. A little-known detail is that Washington quietly pushed to alter the film's final moments. In the original script, John died by suicide. Washington convinced Cassavetes to keep him alive, arguing that hope had to survive, not just the man. That instinct preserved the film's emotional legacy. Critics were divided on the movie's melodramatic tone, but audiences responded viscerally. Theatergoers reportedly applauded during the climax, a rare reaction for a thriller. What carried the film was Washington's balance of rage and restraint. He made the audience feel that morality itself was trapped alongside him in that emergency room. Joe Miller. In Philadelphia, released in 1993, Denzel Washington delivers one of the most quietly groundbreaking performances of his career as Joe Miller, a small-time, streetwise lawyer who evolves from homophobia to profound empathy after taking on the wrongful termination case of Andrew Beckett, a gay attorney with AIDS played by Tom Hanks. Washington's challenge in this role was not to portray overt transformation, but to capture the gradual erosion of prejudice through human connection. He succeeds by grounding Miller in authenticity. Every word, glance, and hesitation feels lived in. At the film's outset, Miller is confident, charming, and unabashedly prejudiced. Washington makes no attempt to soften him. His laughter at crude jokes, his discomfort in proximity to Beckett, and his dismissive arrogance toward the case all signal a man confined by ignorance. Yet when financial need and moral instinct intersect, he reluctantly agrees to represent Beckett. From that moment forward, Washington begins an exquisite slow burn of awakening. He does not signal change with sentimentality, but with microshifts, slower speech, steadier eye contact, and softening body language. His performance becomes a study in moral education, delivered through empathy rather than ideology. Washington reportedly spent significant time shadowing real defense attorneys in Philadelphia to perfect Joe's courtroom rhythm. He learned how lawyers use movement as punctuation, how pacing, tone, and timing can turn logic into persuasion. This discipline shows in the courtroom scenes where Miller's confidence transitions from bravado to integrity. His cross-examination of the corporate witnesses builds like music, each question shorter, sharper, more personal. When he finally confronts the firm's bigotry, Washington delivers his lines not as accusations but as moral indictments, channeling calm outrage through stillness. One of the film's most revealing scenes occurs outside the courtroom when Miller visits Beckett's apartment. Surrounded by photos and classical music, Joe witnesses the beauty of a life he had reduced to a stereotype. Washington's face carries the weight of silent revelation. It's not a man learning tolerance, it's a man recognizing shared humanity. Later, during Beckett's hospital stay, Miller's decision to embrace him physically, a simple touch of the hand, becomes the emotional peak of Washington's restraint. Before Philadelphia, Hollywood was terrified to make a film about AIDS, let alone one centered on a same-sex relationship. Studios called the project career suicide, and the script was passed around for years until Jonathan Demme agreed to direct. What changed everything was Denzel Washington. His decision to take the role gave the film instant legitimacy. Demme later admitted, "Without Denzel, the movie never would have been made." On set, Washington brought the same courage that got the project greenlit. The courtroom scenes were so emotionally charged that crew members cried behind the camera. During one take, when Joe Miller cross-examines Andrew Beckett about his private life, both Washington and Hanks were visibly shaking after cut was called. Reflecting on that moment, Denzel said, "Tom gave me permission to be uncomfortable," acknowledging that their on-screen tension mirrored the unease many people still felt about confronting AIDS and homophobia head-on. Few know that Washington initially hesitated to take the role, unsure how audiences would receive a black male lead expressing compassion for a gay man with AIDS during that era. He ultimately accepted after realizing that empathy itself was the film's thesis. His collaboration with Tom Hanks was rooted in mutual respect. Both actors avoided rehearsing their emotional scenes together to preserve authenticity. By the film's end, when Miller tearfully delivers Beckett's final words to the jury, Washington embodies a moral inversion. The lawyer who once mocked vulnerability now defends it as sacred. His final gaze at Beckett's memorial footage is understated yet overwhelming, the look of a man permanently changed by proximity to truth. Washington turned what could have been a supporting role into a meditation on conscience, proving that transformation, when played honestly, can be as cinematic as revolution. If you like this analysis, you'll love where I go next. Click the video on your screen and find out.